All right, so we'll say good morning. Let us begin. Okay, so we left off, Rabbi say, if you remember again, mitzvahs lulav. No, I'm sorry. We left off Evo, right? Amar Ivo. 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. Amar Ivo, Mem Dalad Amad Beis. Today's daf is Mem Hey, Mem Dalad Amad Beis. Amar Ivo, quickly. Mishum Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok. So Ivo is the name of Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok. So what? Al Yalich Adam Ba'arvei Shabbasos Yoser Megimel Parsos. A person should not travel more than Gimel Parsos on Erev Shabbos. Why? He says, I'm sorry, Yoser Megimel Parsos. If you look at Rashi, Rabbi say, he says, Lo Yahalich. Eli Yishbos Lo Ba'od Yom Gadol V'Yachal Lo Suda Shabbos. Rabbi say, as I mentioned yesterday, the Mishnah Brura comments on this halacha of not traveling more than Gimel Parsos. That Gimel Parsos is approximately the amount of distance that would take you a quarter of a day to travel. I should say actually a third of the day to travel, is what the Mishnah Brura says. The concern is that if a person spends the bulk of Friday traveling, what's going to happen? They're not going to have time to make necessary provisions for Shabbos, and a person won't have Su'udah Shabbos. And if a person doesn't have Su'udah Shabbos, then again, that's going to detract from their oneg, from their enjoyment of Shabbos. Therefore, a person should not travel more than the Gimel Parasos. Amar Rav Kahana, lo Amar El Lebeisei. Rav Kahana said, when is this true? When one is traveling home. So if one is traveling in the direction of home and one realizes that one will not make it there with sufficient time for Shabbos, the concern is that Lamaisa, once the members of one's household will not have sufficient time to prepare for him food for Shabbos, and he's not going to have Oneg Shabbos. Therefore, better to go ahead and stay where you are or travel a little bit less and have time to prepare your food. But if you're traveling to an inn, see, also when you're traveling to an inn, very often when people went to inns, they realized that they had to provide for their own provisions. So a person is already prepared to make do with what they have. Others say no. Rather, according to Rav Kahana, this is even true in one's home, meaning that if one is traveling to one's house on Shabbos, one should not travel more than 3 parsos, in order that one not get home too close to Shabbos, and then one's household not have the ability to prepare food for him for Shabbos, thereby diminishing from his own egg Shabbos. And certainly all the more so it applies to what? To an inn. Because also Rashi points out that to one's own home, often one would say, you know what, it's okay if I have a little bit less for Shabbos, it's just nice to be home. Kamashwan, that Sudo Shabbos are exceptionally important, so one should not travel more than 3 parsos, even in the direction of his own home on Shabbos. Amar Rav Kahana said, Bididi hava uvda, this happened to me. Va'afilu kasa daharnas alo ashkachei. So Rav Kahana says, it happened to me that I was traveling, and what happens? I traveled more than 3 parsos. This sounds like maybe he came to an inn, not necessarily his house. And I came to an inn, and what happened? I got there right before Shabbos, and I could not even find kasa daharnaso. What's kasa daharnaso? Fish hash. It was a dish made of fish kishkas with a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. It's considered to be a very simple food. And I'm kind of saying essentially when I showed up so close to Shabbos, there was nothing for me to eat, not even a little bit of kasa daharnaso. And I will say this is how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Shulchan Aruch says that on Erev Shabbos a person should not go ahead and travel more than 3 parsos. Obviously, it's reflective of their type of travel, of their type of means of travel. But his point is that a person should not travel on Shabbos in a way where a person is not going to have time to prepare properly for their oneg Shabbos. Says the Gemara, mitzvahs lulav ketzad. So if you remember again, the Mishnah said that how do they perform the mitzvah of lulav on Shabbos? That they would go ahead and bring their lulav to the Beis HaMikdash on Erev Shabbos, and the Chazon and the Gaboim would take it and arrange it on the itztava, arrange the lulavim on the benches. So says the Gemara, Tani Tanakamei Rav Nachman, Sudrin al gag ha'itztava. They would go ahead and they would place the lulavim. So remember, everybody would come bring their lulav, give it to the Gaboim, and the Gaboim would place the lulavim, according to Rav Nachman, on the roof of the itztava. I will say, what does this mean? There were benches by Harabayis, as we'll see in just a little bit. So what happened by the benches? These were roofed benches. So according to Rav Nachman, they would place the lulavim on top of the roofs of the benches, and the next day everybody would come and claim their lulavim. So the Gemara says, Amalei. So he said to him, this is Rav Nachman now speaking, top of Memhei, I will say, if you put lulavim on the top of the roofs of the benches, what's going to happen? The sun's going to come out, and the sun's going to dry out the lulavim. So do you want to dry the lulavim? So the Gemara says, Ela ima al gav ha'itztava. Rather, what it means to say is they place the lulavim where? On the actual benches themselves. Not al gag, but al gav, on top of the bench. Amar Rachba, Amar Rav Yehuda. Rachba said the name of Rav Yehuda. Harabayis stav kafel haya, stav lifnim mistav. On the Harabayis, literally Rabbi say was a doubled row of benches, one row within another row. So the Harabayis just giving you a fact. There were Rashi says stav kafel itztavaos makifos also v'itztavaos achirim lifanim meheket. So they had two rows of benches that went around Harabayis, and it was on these benches that the Gaboim used to put the lulavim for the people to collect the next day when they came to the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Mishnah, Mitzvahs Arava Ketzad. How would they perform the mitzvah of Arava? It's a beautiful Gemara. So the Gemara says, Ketzad, how would they do it? Makom. Makom Haya Lematim Yerushalayim. There was a place that was in the lower down from Yerushalayim, V'nikra Motza, and it was called Motza. I will say it's interesting. You know, if you leave when you leave Yerushalayim today, so the truth is there's a city called Motza. Now I don't think it's the same Motza, because again it's that actually current day Motza is a little bit far. It is a little bit far. I mean, you are going down when you go to Motza. But the truth is, if you think about where the Beis HaMikdash is, if you think about traveling, like walking from the Kotel to where Motza is, it's a pretty big trip. It doesn't sound like that. It sounds like this was some valley not too far from the Harabayis. I'm sorry?
You're doing it Erev Shabbos, you wouldn't have enough fish.
You would know, that's right. You wouldn't have enough Kazdarnasa. And what happens? V'nikra Motza, Yardin L'sham, so they would go down to there, Umelaktin Misham Murabios, or Murbios Shel Arava. And they would go to this place Motza, and they would collect from there literally bunches of aravos, bundles of aravos. Uboyin v'zokfin osan, but see they have his back, and they would bring the aravos, and they literally would rest the aravos against the side of the mizbeach, v'roshehen kefufin al gab hamizbeach, and the tops of the aravos. This is actually quite amazing. The aravos were so tall that the top of the arava literally hanged over the top of the mizbeach. And what happened? Taku v'heriu v'taku. At that point in time, they blew a tekiah, a cherua, and a tekiah. Taku heriu v'taku. And what happened? B'chol yom makifin asam mizbeach pam achas. Every day they would circle the mizbeach one time. V'omrim ana Hashem Hoshiana, and they would say the phrase ana Hashem Hoshiana, ana Hashem hatzlichana. Rabbi Yehuda says no. They would say ani v'ho Hoshiana. They would say ani v'ho. Now I will say it's interesting. Rashi points out over here that this phrase ani v'ho is actually related, is a part of the 72-letter name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So they would say ani v'ho Hoshiana v'osa hayom makifin esam mizbeach shava pamim. And on that day is a reference to what? To the 7th day of Sukkot. They would circle the mizbeach 7 times. B'shas petirasan mahenomin. On the 7th day, when they would take leave of the mizbeach after doing the arava service, what would they say? They mahenomin yofi lecha mizbeach, yofi lecha mizbeach. Beauty is yours, mizbeach. Beauty is yours, mizbeach. Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Eliezer says lecha ulecha mizbeach. Lecha ulecha mizbeach. According to Rabbi Eliezer, what would they say? To you HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to you mizbeach. To you HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to you mizbeach. Again, we'll define what these phrases mean in the Gemara. K'ma'aseu b'chol kach ma'aseu b'Shabbos. The same way that they did the Arava service during the week is the same way they did it on Shabbos, with one difference. Ella sheyimelaktin osan me'erev umanichin. Rather, what was the difference? They would harvest the Aravos on Erev Shabbos. Harvest the Aravos on Erev Shabbos. Umanichin osan begigios shel zahav, and they would place the aravos in golden barrels in order that what? Kadesh lo yichmosh, in order they were not wither. So they would have these golden barrels filled with water, and they would place the aravos inside these golden barrels that the aravos should not wither. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, Charios shel dekel hayimavin. I will say, Rabbi Yochanan seems to be introducing or discussing a new practice. So he says, what would they do in the Beis HaMikdash? They would bring palm branches, which sounds like lulavim, but not lulavim they used for mitzvah. They would bring additional palm branches, v'chovtin osan bekarka, and they would literally go ahead and hit it against the ground, b'tzidei hamizbeach, against the side of the mizbeach, v'osa hayom, and on that day nikra chibut chorios. They would call that day the beating of the palm branches. Again, we'll discuss in the Gemara what the symbolism of that practice was. Miyad tinokos shomtin es lulavim. On the seventh day, they would take the lulavim from the children, and what? V'ochlin esrogehen, and they would go ahead and eat the children's esrogim. So on the seventh day, after the last performance of the mitzvah, they would take the kids lulavim and they would eat the kids esrogim. Also, just an interesting idea. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says va'ochlin esrogim shel tinokos ve'in b'davar lo mishum gezel ve'lo mishum darkei shalom. And both said there's no issue of theft here. Now, what this is saying over here is it's not just I took the esrog of my kid, I could take the esrog of your kid. Now, obviously, if your kid has an esrog, who does that belong? Bless you. Who does that belong to? That belongs to the parent. So yeah, Rashi says there's no issue of theft, and there's no issue of darkei shalom, of disrupting communal harmony. Shekach nagu machmas simcha, because this was done as a form of simcha. Essentially, after we discharged the obligation with the esrog on the last day, we physically enjoyed the mitzvah. So because it's an element of simcha, therefore there's no gezel. It's not called theft. Just quickly, if you look at Tosfos, this is just a very interesting idea. Tosfos says miyad tinoko shomtin ulavehem. Actually, you know what? Let's do the daf first, and then we'll come back to it if we have time. Says the Gemara, Tana makom kalan yahava. So this place Motza was a tax exempt area. Rashi says kalanya ben chorim min amas shel melech. It was not a taxed area. So the Gemara says v'tana didan my taima karile Motza. So why does our Tana call the name of this place Motza? Oh, ID demeithak mikarga demalka karile Motza. Because it was exempt from the king's head tax, it was called Motza. So Motza literally means what? Or can literally mean exempted. Exempted. So the place got its name. Why? Because Lamaisa, it was exempted from the king's head tax. Uboin v'zok v'nosa b'tzidei. They would go ahead and they take these aravas and they stand up the aravas against the side of the mizbeach. And remember, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that the top of the arava would hang over. Rosh Kehuvin al-Gabi mizbeach. Top of the arava would hang over the top of the mizbeach. So the Gemara says the following. Tana, I will say, by the way, just so you understand, that's tall. That's tall because I was going to see that the mizbeach itself was 9 amos tall. So the fact that the arava was taller than that and hung over was quite significant. So we'll see this now. The Gemara says, Tana, Rabos va'arukos ugivos achada sar'ama. There were many aravos, and they were long. How tall were they? They were 11 amos tall. Pretty tall, both sides. Remember again, an amos is about 1.5 feet. So it's pretty significant. So they were 11 amos tall. Kadei sheyihu gochos al mizbeach amma. In order that they would be able to lean against the mizbeach and overhang on the mizbeach for an amma. Amar Marimar Mishum Mar Zutra Shmamina Al Yisod Manachlu. So both sides. Remember again, it must be. So now what we're having over here is that Lamaisa, we want the arava was able to hang over the mizbeach by an amma. Says the Gemara, in order for that to happen, the aravos must have been placed on the yisod. The yisod, Rabbi say, is the base of the mizbeach. Now watch this. So the Gemara says, the because if you're going to tell me that lemaisa, the arava was placed on the ground level, here's the issue. Michti, let's see how this would work out. Allah amma, the kanas amma. Both sides, the way the mizbeach was, if you can imagine, you start from the bottom. So the way it worked is that the mizbeach went up an amma, and then it went in an amma. That amma, now what becomes that amma protrusion, that's called the yisod. That's called the base. All right. Zeu yisod. Allah chamesh. So we'll say again. Now remember. Now let's measure again. So now we have amma up, amma indent. Now again, measuring from that indentation, go up another 5 amos. Allah chamesh v'kanos amma. Then the mizbeach indents another amma. That's called zehu sovev. Now again, measure from the indentation of the sovev. Allah shalosh goes up another 3 amos. Zem makom hakronos. Then you've gotten to the top of what? To the top of the horns, which Rabosai again are the 4 protrusions on the top of the mizbeach. Zem makom hakronos. So what happens? Gochos ala mizbeach heichim mishkachasla. So how could it be that the arava would overhang the mizbeach? That's 9 amos. Heichim mishkachasla. Elalav shmamina ayisod manach lehu shmamina. Rather, it must be that they would place it actually on the yisod. I will say there are 2 options for how you can place the arava. If you place the arava at ground level, what's the issue? The issue is that it's going to be placed at an angle, right? Because remember, again, placing it on ground level means that, remember, you have 3 sets, you have 2 protrusions. So therefore, again, if you place it on the angle and the arava is 11 amos tall, you're not going to have a 1 amma overhang. Essentially, the Gemara says the only way to have a 1 amma overhang of the arava is how? To place it against the yisod, which essentially makes it flush with the mizbeach itself, which then allows for the 1 amma overhang. So the Gemara says, therefore, shmamina. Amar Rabbi Avo, Mikra. What's the pasuk? Rabbi say when it says what's the pasuk, what it's asking is Rashi is the olos lamalam in mizbeach. Obviously, this fact that we want the aravos to overhang the mizbeach. Is there some kind of scriptural proof that? Is there some kind of scriptural allusion for that? So the Gemara says, Shneimar, yes, Isru chag ba'avosim ad karnos hamizbeach. So the Gemara says, what's the pasuk? The pasuk is from Tehillim. Now, the way the Gemara is understanding this is the following. Look at Rashi. Isru chag ba'avosim. Isru chag ba'avosim. Be'ilonos. So I will say the way that kimo v'chin avosim haisat samaraso. So the Gemara is understanding that the word avosim literally means those things that are bundled together. The Gemara understands that to refer to tree-like items, i.e. aravos. So isru chag ba'avosim, go ahead and bundle together those trees of the chag. Those trees of the chag. What are the trees of the chag? That is a reference to aravos. B'tzad shelo asru kimo akifu osri gefen liyiro yister yisro. So what happens? Isru chag. So isru means bundle. Chag means Yom Tov. Ba'avosim means trees. So bundle together the trees of the Yom Tov, which the Gemara's understanding is a reference to aravos, until where? Ad karnos hamizbeach. Until ultimately they reach the corners of the mizbeach. Rashi says ad karnos shim gavos min hamizbeach. Remember again, those horns are taller than the top of the mizbeach. So put the trees of the Yom Tov until they reach at least the horns of the mizbeach. Okay. Remember again, I will say we're not looking for a pasuk that tells us we have to do something. We're looking for an allusion to this idea that we want the aravos to overhang the mizbeach. So the Gemara goes right to Amr Rabbi Avo, Amr Rabbi Lazar, beautiful Gemara. Kalanot lulav ba'ogdo. Anyone who takes the lulav bundle, v'hadas ba'avoso, and takes a beautiful hadas ba'avos. Remember again, avos means plated. Means remember it has the three leaves at every step. Ma'ala alav akasuv kilu b'ana mizbeach. The Torah treats it as if he has built a mizbeach. Vehikriv alav carbon, and has offered a carbon on it. So we'll say if you take your lulav and esrog and your adasim, then what happens? It's as if you brought a carbon. Where do we know this from? Shenamar, because the pasuk says on the base, Isru chag ba'avosim ad karnos hamizbeach. Literally, Rashi says Isru agudo shalulav. So Isru means bundle together. That refers to a lulav bundle. Chag on Yom Tov ba'avosim. Remember what are hadassim called? Anaf eitz avos. With your hadassim ad karnos hamizbeach. If you take your lulav, you take your hadassim, it is as if what? Rashi says ad karnos hari hu lachem kimatan damim shevekranos hamizbeach. It's as if you have placed blood on the corners of the mizbeach, i.e., as if you have actually brought a carbon. So we'll say if you take your lulav and esrog, your hadassim, your haravos, it's as if you have brought a carbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Am Rabbi Yomi Mishon Rabbi Shimon Bayachai, Rabbi Yochanan Mishon Rabbi Shimon HaMachusi Mishem Rabbi Yochanan HaMakusi Kala Ose Isser Lechag Ba'achila Ushtia. I will say in this context, Isser means connection. Whoever creates a connection to the Yom Tov through eating and drinking, i.e., if you celebrate the Yom Tov through eating and drinking, then what? Ma'ala alav akasov kilubana mizbeach v'hikrev alav karban. The Torah treats it as if what? As if you have gone ahead and built an altar and offered a carbon on top of it. Shene emar isru chag ba'avosim ad karnos hamizbeach. Because the pasuk says literally, connect with the Yom Tov. How do you connect with the Yom Tov? Ba'avosim. I will say avosim. Rashi says behemos avos ushmenos is a reference to what? Good and fat animals, which is a reference to good meat. If you connect to the Yom Tov with good meat, ad karnos hamizbeach. It's as if what? It's as if you have offered up a carbon on the mizbeach itself. Amr Chizkiah, Amr Rabbi Yirmiyah, Mishum Rashbi. So we'll say another idea. Chizkiah says in name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Kol mitzvos kulan, all mitzvos, ein adam yotzei bahen elech derech gidilas. And also is an interesting yesod. A person can only be yotzei mitzvos if you perform them the way in which they grow. Now, what does it mean? Look at Rashi. Derech gidilasan, hatachton lemata, v'ha'elyon lemala. What that means is the bottom part is on the bottom and the top part is on the top. So we'll say, so for example, let's just, before we get to the Gemara's example, if you were to take a lulav and you were to go ahead and hold the lulav upside down, then Lamaisa, you would not be yotzei. You would not be yotzei. Why? Because that's not called derech gidilasan. So the Gemara says, where do you know this from? Shene emar, atzei shitim omdim. Because also by the Mishkan says that you're supposed to use atzei shitim is acacia wood. You're supposed to use acacia wood omdim, standing. So the Gemara says, what does that mean, omdim? Derech gidilasan. It means that you have to use the wood the way it grows. So we'll say it's very interesting. So apparently, when using the wood, when you fashion that wood into boards, you had to use the wood in the same direction in which it grew. So you cannot take the board that was taken from the trunk of the tree and invert it, turn it upside. You'd have to use it the way it grew. Davar acher, another possibility for what omdim means. Omdim shema'amidin es sipuyon. Or the other possibility is that the wood must be able to hold its overlay. Let's remember again, the wood planks in the Mishkan had a gold overlay. There are two ways you could have made a gold overlay. One possibility was you would make a sheet of gold that was as large as the wooden plank itself and just simply cover the wooden plank with the golden sheet. Or other possibility, which is what happened, is they made smaller sheets, and it's quite amazing, they made golden nails. And the sheets of gold were attached to the planks of wood with golden nails. So the Gemara says that's what it means. Atze shitim omdim, that the shitim wood, the acacia wood, had to be able to hold the golden plates on top of it with the golden nails. Davar acher, another possibility. Omdim, what does it mean that they were standing? Shema tomar avad sivram ubatal sikuyon. Maybe you'll say that the wood of the Mishkan has become irrelevant, i.e. the Mishkan's gone, right? The wood of the Mishkan, that the Mishkan was put away, and it has essentially become obsolete for future generations. Talmud Lomar Atze Shitim Omdim. Therefore, the pasuk says that the Mishkan is made of acacia wood that is standing. She'omdim li olam uli ome olamim. The significance of the Mishkan is in fact eternal. We'll say what that means. What is going to be the future significance of the Mishkan? That remains perhaps to still be seen. But Lemaisa, it's omdim. It has eternal significance. The Amar Chizkiah, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Mishra Mishra Bar Yochai. This is an amazing Gemara. So here I have Chizkiah in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, who said the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Yochel ani liftar es ha'olam kulo min adin. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, I said, I can exempt the entire world from punishment. Meaning, I will say, now what is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai saying over here? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is saying is, I am prepared to take on the responsibility for the collective sin of mankind. I am not to be confused with other men who made the same claim, right? But the idea over here is that he's saying that I am ready. I could absorb the chait of the chatoim of the world. I have broad enough shoulders that I could absorb that. However, liftars did kulam minadin min yom shenivrasi ad ata. But I could only absorb the sin of the world from the day that I was created until now. V'ilmali Eliezer b'ni imi, and if my son Eliezer were to join me in this initiative, then we could absorb the sin of the world. Miyom shenivra ha'olam va'ad achshav. We could absorb the sin of the world from the day that it was created until today. V'ilmali Yosam ben Uzziyo imanu. And if Yosem ben Uzziyo, Yosem was one of the kings of the Jewish people, who was, Rabbi, a very righteous individual. If Yosem ben Uzziyo was with us, then Miyom Shenivra Olam Ad Sofo. Then the three of us together could absorb all of the sin from the day the world was created until the end of time. To the end of time. Meaning, I will say, understand what that's saying is that it's not a statement of arrogance. What it's saying is that Lamaisa, we'd be prepared to give ourselves. Remember, there's the concept of Misas Tzadiki Mechaber, the death of the righteous atones. So what they're saying is the three of us together, again, through death, through suffering, could go ahead and atone for all of the sins of the world together from the day that it was created until the end of time. Rashi points out over here, Yosam ben Azuyo, look at Rashi, Liftar, Bizchusi, Ani sovel kol avonosehem upotrin minadin. So I'll say what Rabbi Shimon Yochai is saying is, I would take upon me all of the suffering of humanity, all of the suffering of the world, in order to exempt them from punishment and take all of that punishment on myself. An incredibly selfless statement. Rashi just points out over here, Yosef ben Uziyo, Tzadikaya, he was a righteous man. Va'anav Yosef misham malachim, he was exceptionally humble. V'zacha bekibod aviv, and he was exceptionally proficient in his kibod avim. Rabosai, Yosam's father Uziyo was a Metzora. So because he was a Metzora, he was not permitted to live in Yerushalayim. So Yosam assumes the responsibility of the monarchy, but would not assume the title of king while his father was still alive. Furthermore, all the proclamations that he made, he always did in the name of his father. So he was exceptionally humble, exceptionally proficient in Kibbutz Avayim. So Rav Shimon Yochai says, if I had me, my son Eliezer, remember again, I will say, Rav Shimon Yochai and his son Eliezer had a very unique relationship. Why? They hid in the cave together for all of those years. So he said, if I had me, my son, and Yosam, the three of us together could take upon us the punishments for all of humanity and absolve humanity from din. Va'amr Chizkion Rabbi Yirmiyah Mishum Rashbi Ra'isi b'nei Aliyah. We'll say another very profound Gemara. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, I have seen the b'nei Aliyah. And I will say, who are b'nei Aliyah? We'll discuss in just a moment. V'hein mu'atin. And there are very few of them. There are very few of them. Now look at Rashi. Ra'isi b'nei Aliyah v'hein mu'atin. Roa ani lefi ma'aseh abrios sheb'nei Aliyah koach kat hamekablim p'nei hashchina mu'atin. So we'll say b'nei Aliyah are people who are capable of receiving prophecy. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, I have looked around, and the people who are capable of receiving prophecy, Bnei Aliyah, are very few in number. Im Elef, if there are 1,000 throughout the entire world, Ima Elefain, Ani Ubni Mehen, then I and my son are counted among them. Im Mea, if there are only 100, Haim, if there are only 100, Ani Ubni Mehen, then my son and I are counted among the 100. Im Shnayim Hain, and if there are only two people in this entire world who are capable of receiving prophecy, Ani Ubni Hain. Those two would be me and my son. I will say again, I want to be clear. These are not statements of arrogance on the part of Rashbi. These are statements of awareness of his position. He's saying, I know what I am, I know what I'm not, and I'm saying that if there were two people who are capable of receiving nevuah in this world, it would be me and my son. But is that true, that there are so few b'nei Aliyah, there are so few people who are capable of receiving prophecy? But Rava said, Tamni sari alfi dara. There are 18,000 rows of righteous people that sit before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or in other words, it seems to be that there are 18,000 rows of people who are capable of receiving nevuah. Shene'emar, because the pasuk says, and over here is quoting the pasuk. The Gemara is quoting the pasuk from Yecheskel. Soviv, surrounding Hashem. Soviv, Shmona Asar Elef. There are 18,000 men that surround the Shekhinah that are able to receive prophecy. So how could Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that there are very few b'nei Aliyah? Lo kash, it's not a contradiction. Hadim mistakli ba'aspaklaria meira. Hadlo mistakli ba'aspaklaria meira. Both say there are different gradations of nevuah. Aspaklaria literally means a screen. There are those who see HaKadosh Baruch Hu through a clear screen, and there are those who see HaKadosh Baruch Hu through an obscured screen, which represents clarity of nevuah, clarity of prophecy. So what the 18,000 refers to people who what? Who see baspaklaria she'ina me'ira. They see through a screen, but it's not a clear screen. There are many people like that. However, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was saying is there's a very few number of people who could see HaKadosh Baruch Hu through aspaklaria me'ira. Who could see HaKadosh Baruch Hu through an absolutely clear screen. But is that true? That there are so few people that could see God through the clear screen? But Abaye says, listen to this Rabbi, and this is the makar of a very well-known concept. Lo pachos alma mitlasin v'shisat tzadiki demekabli ape shchina b'chol yom. There are no less than 36 tzaddikim. We'll say this is the makar for this concept. There are no less than 36 tzaddikim who are able to receive the Shekhinah each and every day. I'll say this is the concept of the 36 tzaddikim. So there are no less than 36 tzaddikim that essentially have the ability to be able to receive the Shekhinah every day, which sounds like what? They have aspak laria me'ira, that they have the ability to have this clarity of vision. So 36 is nothing to scoff at. Certainly a pretty significant number for people who are having prophecy, clear prophecy. Shena Emar, the ashrei kol chochei lo. Praiseworthy is the one who waits for him. Lo lamid vav b'gematria, lo b'gematria, tlasen v'shisava. What is lo in gematria? 36. So literally, there are 36 people who are praiseworthy because they await the word of God, i.e., that they receive the word of God on a daily basis. So the Gemara says, lo kash, it's not a contradiction. Had da'ayel bebar, had da'ayli below bar. So what Shil Bar Yochai was talking about were people who are able to enter without permission. Both say the 36 tzaddikim are tzaddikim, but so to speak, they cannot go ahead and enter without permission. What does that mean? They can't engage the dialogue with God. God engages them in the dialogue. God initiates. What Rosh Hashanah was saying is the Bnei Aliyah that he was referring to is twofold. Number one, people who receive nevuah b'aspaklaria hami'ira, clarity. And number two, what? They can initiate the dialogue. Those are very few and far between. There are at least 36 who are able to go ahead and receive prophecy. But again, that prophecy is ultimately initiated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, just an interesting idea. B'shas petiras and mahin omrim. When we would take leave of the Mizbeach, what would we say? What would we say? So remember again, the Mishnah spoke about what would they say? They would say, I'm sorry, they would say, Yofi l'cha Mizbeach, l'ka u'lecha Mizbeach, l'ka u'lecha Mizbeach. To you HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to you Mizbeach, to you HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to you Mizbeach. So says the Gemara, how can you do that? Rabbi say, in general, when praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you cannot include something else in that praise. Right? So here you are including something else. What are you saying? You're praising God and what? And you're praising the altar. You can't do that. Why Vitanya? Whoever goes ahead and includes the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and something else in the same statement of praise, literally is uprooted from the world. Shneimar, because the pasuk says, Bilti laHashem levado. You have to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu by himself without including anything else in that phrase. In that praise. This is what it means to say. Lika anachnu modim. Tziu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in this context, modim modim means, Rashi says, admit. Tziu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we admit that you are our one and only God. Ulecha anu mishabchin. And to you, Mizbeach, we praise you. So we're saying actually two different phrases. We admit that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our only God, and we praise the Mizbeach. Leka anachnu modim. To you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we admit that you are our God. Uleka ulecha anu mekalsin. And to you, Mizbeach, we say beautiful things. Okay. Kimaseh b'chol. The same way we do it during the week, we do it on Shabbos as well. Remember again, I will say, then the Mishnah quoted the procedure of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, what would he do? He would bring palm branches into the Beis HaMikdash, and he would beat it on the ground right next to the Mizbeach. Why would he do this? Amar Rav Huna, my term Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. What's Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka's logic? Tichsiv kapos. Rabbi say because the pasuk by Lulav says what? Kapos tomorrow. Now Rabbi Yochanan understands that kapos is what? Kapos is plural, which indicates that the Lulav is taken twice. What are the two times? One is for the mitzvah, and the second is what? For this process of what he calls the chibut charios. The beating of the palm branch against the floor. So the Gemara says, "Achas shnaim, achas lulav, achas lemizbeach." One is for the mitzvah of lulav, and one is for the beating on the ground by the mizbeach. For the Rabbanan say no. Kapos ksiv. Rabbanan say kapos is written without a vav. So therefore, again, it's written chasra because it doesn't have a vav. That takes away from what? That takes away from the plurality of the word. Rabbi Levi says, no. This is the meaning of the practice. Kitamar, that the whole idea of according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka of the beating of the palm branches was to say that we want to be like the date palm. Why? Mat tamar zeh ein lo ela leiv echad. Just like the tamar, the date palm has only one heart. Now, both say, what does that mean? If you look at Rashi says, ein lo ela leiv echad ke'ein moach yishbo kigon be'etz ha'egos va'gefen ve'ein lo ela be'etz ha'imtzoy ha'zakav va'olav v'gadol ha'mala v'lo b'charios ha'mechados. Let's listen to this. The way it works in a date palm the way it works in regular trees is, let's say you have sap, and that sap perhaps originates in the trunk, but it goes to all the branches. The date palm only has sap in its trunk, has no sap in the branches. So the Gemara says, just like the date palm, so to speak, has only one heart, meaning the sap is centralized in the trunk, in only one place it has one heart. Af Yisrael ein lahem elalev echad la'avim shabashayim. So too, we only have one heart before you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have only one heart for you. So according to Rabbi Yochanan and Baroka, this beautiful practice of taking the date palms and literally hitting them on the floor, which represents a prostration, which represents a bowing, by the Mizbeach in front of the Beis HaMikdash, represents just like the date palm has only one heart, i.e. sap in the trunk, so too we only have one heart for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amr Rav Yehuda Shmuel, Lulav Shiva, Succah Yom Echad. So we'll say now a separate topic. Rabbi Yehuda is the name of Shmuel. The Lulav Shiva. Now, what does it mean, Lulav Shiva? So we're talking about now over here the bracha. So says Rav Yehuda, you make a bracha on the Lulav all 7 days, and Sukkah Yom Echad. But if Sukkah, you only make a bracha on the first day, and that's it. My time, what's the reason? Lulav the mafsiki leilos miyamim kol yoma mitzvah ba'apei nafshehu. Because also when it comes to lulav, the mitzvah of lulav is only by day and not at night. Therefore, what? Therefore, every single night will literally end the mitzvah. So I do the mitzvah on the first day, the night comes along, it ends it. Therefore, the next day when I do the mitzvah, it's what? It's a brand new mitzvah. Because it's a brand new mitzvah, it requires a new bracha. Sukkah de lo mafsiki leilos miyamim kulo shiva kechad yoma arichadamu. But on the other hand, sukkah, which I will say applies both by day and by night, what? Both by day and by night. Lemaisa, again, one bracha takes care of the entire Yom Tov. For Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan, Sukkah Shiva, v'lulav Yom Echad. He says, no, Sukkah you make a bracha all 7 days, and lulav you make a bracha on one day. My time, what's the reason? Sukkah d'oraisa Shiva, because Sukkah is a d'oraisa all 7 days. V'lulav d'rabbanan sakalei b'chad yoma. But lulav, again, Abba says, is only what? Is only d'oraisa on the first day. The rest of the days are all d'Rabbanan. So ki asa Ravin am Rabbi Yochanan echad zeh ve'echad zeh shiva. So we'll say when Rabin came along, he said the name of Rabbi Yochanan that both for lulav as well as for sukkah we make a bracha on all 7 days. And we'll say that indeed is halacha lemaisa. Amar Rav Yosef nokut de Rabba Bar Chana biyadecha. Take the sheet of Rabba Bar Chana in your hand. The kulhu amoroi kaimi kavase b'sukkah, because everyone holds like him by sukkah. I will say, what did Rabba say? That you make a bracha all 7 days by sukkah. So we'll say what comes out over here now is a fundamental machlokes as to how we make the bracha. Again, for us it's a little anticlimactic. Why? Because l'maisa we know that we make a bracha for both lulav and sukkah all 7 days, which essentially is conformance with the position of Rabbi Yochanan. We'll stop over here for today by this Gemara. Although again, l'maisa the sukkah is not over, but I want to just take 1 minute to show you that Tosfos on Amud Aleph. So go back for just a moment. This is a great Tosfos. We're not going to do the whole thing just because of time, but I just want to show you. So it's the Tosfos Miyat Tinoko Shom Levei. So we'll say, if you remember again, the Mishnah said that on the 7th day of Sukkot, you could take the lulav of the katan, you could take his esrog, and you could eat it. And Rashi pointed out, look at the Gemara, look at Tosfos, excuse me. Miyat Tinoko Shom Lulevein, Lulave Hatinokos Shomtin Hagdolam Miyadan. So the adults take the lulav from the children, v'ochlin esrogein shel tinokos, and they also eat the esrogim of the children. Ve'ein b'davar gezel v'lo mishum darkei shalom, and there's no issue of theft, there's no issue of disrupting public harmony. Ela shekach nagu bo machmas simcha, but because this was done in the context of simcha, therefore it's permitted. Kach perish b'kuntros. I will say, so I just want to show you because I think this is fascinating. V'yesh lilmod mikan, and therefore we can learn from here. La'osan bachurim sherochvin besusim likras chasan. So we'll say this is wild. So you can learn this. So there was wedding shtick. What was the wedding shtick? So friends of the chasan would get on horses, and what happens? V'nilchamim ze'im zeh. Well, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like jousting, right? So they would get on horses, and they would fight with each other. This was the shtick. I mean, imagine this in the middle of the circle at the chasana, right? So this was the shtick that they would do for the chasam. And what happens? V'korin bigdo shel chaveiro. And what would happen sometimes? The shtick would get a little bit lebedig, and one would end up tearing the shirt of the other. O mekalkel lo suso, or one would end up hurting this horse of the other. Shehin piturin. That's Rabbi say you are not chayiv if you cause that type of damage. Shekach nagu machmas simchas chosan, because at the end of the day, this was in the context of simchas chosan lakala. Rabbi say, you know where else this comes up? Purim. The Shulchan Aruch paskins that in the course of Simcha, I'm dancing with Ruvain, and in the course of dancing with Ruvain, what happens? I go ahead and I end up tearing his shirt. I tug on his suit a little bit too much. So the halacha is I am putter from such damage. Why? Because damage done in the context of Simcha, ultimately there is no liability. So that's why, again, that's what Rashi's saying over here. That Lamaisa, because this is all being done in the context of Simchas Yom Tov, when I take the esrog from the katan, that's called Dvar Simcha. Therefore, there's no liability, just like the jousting for the Chassan and Kala, just like the tearing of the shirt in Simchas Purim. All right. Again, there's more to that, but you could see it. You could see it on your own.
Trying to explain that to all the crying kids.